Hello, this is Marilyn and Marilyn Tseng, and this is the final reflection for my Flipping Your Course final project. And I decided to flip a module in my class on disease epidemiology in the Department of Kinesiology and Public Health on study designs in analytic epidemiology. And sources of error. So this module I decided would take 1 week. So I've described that in the PolyLearn page for this module, where I write, in this week-long module, you'll distinguish among study designs according to their ability to address major sources of error that affect causal inference. And here at the end of this module, you will be able to, these are the higher order thinking objectives that they're working towards, distinguishing among study designs with respect to ability to draw causal inferences, and then identifying studies on a given topic that provide strong evidence for causation. So the one day of this module that I decided to flip is the first one, study designs and sources of error, two specific sources of error, reverse causation and confounding. And initially, I wasn't sure how long this entire module would take, and I decided that it would take a week. So I'm going to focus on just this part 1, but I'll also really quickly go over my thoughts for parts 2 and 3, which would be the rest of the week. So this part 1, here were the lower order thinking objectives for the pre-class activities, and it's name 6 designs, identify the design given a brief description of a study, and then give examples of reverse causation and confounding. I spell out what the pre-class activities are, and I created a lesson here for the pre-class activity. So we can take a quick look at it. It starts with an introduction, and this is the video that I created that I provide a YouTube link to. This is for the formative assessment. It's multiple choice questions, really just to see if they got a good grasp of the different study designs. So for each of these multiple choice questions, I describe a study and give them a choice of one of the study designs to choose from. And if they choose an incorrect answer, they will get a brief explanation. Well, they'll get a hint on what they should be thinking in terms of how to answer the question correctly, and they can try again. They get 2 tries total, and if they get the right answer, which in this case is this one, then it would give them that feedback and they can continue. So there are 5 questions on this, and they would all look like this. And once they've completed that formative assessment, they can move on to the next part of the pre-class activity, which is sources of error. So it's a brief introduction, again, referring back to a video that we would have watched earlier in the class, and then 2 additional pages of content on the 2 specific types of error. And that would be the end of it, the end of the lesson. But after that, there's also as part of their formative assessment, there's a wiki where they would give their own examples of sources of error. And I've created 2 different pages for this. One is reverse causation, and I give them instructions on how to add and explain their own examples of reverse causation. So I ask them to put in a figure or an image like this and then explain or justify their example. And then the same thing for the next page, confounding. So the same thing here, asking them to create an image and upload it onto the page and then to justify their answer. So this is all part of the formative assessment. The first day, the in-class activity would try to bring this to a higher order thinking level. So the learning objective for the in-class activity is to actually take what they know about study designs and to combine it with their knowledge now of those two sources of error. So to compare study designs with respect to their ability to deal with those two sources of error. About 20 minutes reviewing what they did for the pre-class assignment, and then about a half hour for them to work in teams to complete a table where they are basically evaluating the study designs on these two sources of error. They'll work together in teams, and then the last 10 minutes of class will be the teams sharing and being able to explain and justify why they put the studies into strengths or limitations with respect to these two sources of error. And this is an example of what the table would look like with some brief instructions here, listing the 6 study designs and then whether they would put those two sources of error as a strength or limitation of the study. So that is the part of the class that I've flipped for this reflection, but I also did think through what I'd like to eventually develop for the rest of the week. So there will be a part 2 for the second day of the week. They would have another pre-class activity on other sources of error and a lesson developed to address those. And the in-class activity for this would really parallel what they did the first day. So a review of what they've done for pre-class and completing the table, but considering these other sources of error. And then on the third day is really where they're demonstrating their knowledge and applying it to a different topic. So they'll get to read 6 abstracts of scientific studies and evaluate them based on what they know about study design. The 6 studies would represent studies of different designs. They would evaluate them based on what they know about each study design's vulnerability to each of the different types of error, and they should be able to identify the strongest design. So identify which studies should provide the strongest evidence either for or against a causal association. And ultimately, this should prepare them to work on their final project, which will look something like this, where they have a research topic and they're summarizing the evidence for or against a causal association between a given risk factor and a health outcome. So controversial or unknown topics such as whether vitamin D is protective against diabetes, or whether sugar-sweetened beverages actually do increase risk for obesity. So these are questions that are out but aren't settled yet. And the foundation that they get from this module really is critical to how they'll approach this final project as a team. In terms of universal design, I will have all of these, so the project descriptions, the learning objectives, the in-class activities are all on PolyLearn. Those are all written out, and I will also be articulating them in class. The videos are closed captioned, and so I'm hoping that this will be good to help the students understand what the learning objectives are and expressed in different ways. So that's about it for this module, and I wanted to thank you for giving me the chance to think through this particular component of my course, which was really difficult for the students, and I think this will help them process the information in a more stimulating way. Thanks.